Welcome, everyone, to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident observer of the human condition. Thanks for tuning in.
And I'm Alara Sky, lover of all things science and comedic sidekick to your dry, deadpan stylings, Ethan. Delighted to be here with you as always.
Today, our topic is copper. It's not just for pennies and fancy cookware, apparently. There's this whole saga about how it's needed for your brain, but too much can send you down a spiral into potential neurodegeneration. It's like a Greek tragedy in mineral form.
Exactly. Think of copper like that friend who's great in small doses, fantastic at parties, but you definitely don't want him moving into your spare bedroom, rearranging the furniture, and burning toast in the morning. We'll be taking a closer look at how copper deficiency and copper overload each create unique mayhem in your body, especially in the brain.
It's quite an interesting substance. On one hand, you need it for essential functions like healthy nerve cells, energy production, and stable moods. On the other, if you let that little scamp run rampant, you end up with something called oxidative stress, plus a range of neurological issues. All the fun stuff that can spoil your day.
Oxidative stress is like rust forming inside your brain. It's a slow, destructive process that leaves you feeling about as crisp as a week-old salad. Nobody wants that. So, let's start with something that might surprise people. Having low levels of copper in the brain is linked to Parkinson's disease dementia, or PDD.
PDD affects about 1% of the world's population above age 60. I'm always fascinated and slightly freaked out by the stats. And apparently, a whopping 80% of people with Parkinson's eventually develop dementia within 20 years of their initial diagnosis. That's a major chunk.
It's huge. Once PDD sets in, patients experience severe memory loss, impaired judgment, and difficulties with language. Daily tasks become even more challenging, making an already tough condition that much tougher. And research points to an imbalance in metals like copper, particularly a deficiency, in various brain regions among these patients.
Right? Researchers took brain tissue samples from PDD patients and found drastically reduced copper in 7 out of the 9 brain regions they tested. Even the fancy name parts like the cingulate gyrus and substantia nigra weren't spared. I'd like to say those brain regions sound like exotic travel destinations, but apparently they prefer stable copper levels as souvenirs.
Indeed. That same research found parallels in Alzheimer's disease, interestingly enough. So the plot thickens. If you look at the brains of patients with Parkinson's disease dementia and with Alzheimer's disease, you'll see copper levels dipping in some overlapping areas. And when copper gets low, oxidative stress ramps up and mitochondrial function goes out the window.
Let's talk about mitochondria for a moment. Mitochondria are basically the power plants of your cells, which means your body's largest electric grid is operating inside you. If these power plants start getting hammered by insufficient copper, you can say goodbye to efficient energy production. Then your cells become about as energetic as a sloth on a Sunday afternoon.
Precisely. When the mitochondria struggle, it creates a domino effect of free radicals, reactive oxygen species, that damage your neurons and surrounding cells. Low copper can feed into that mess, because you need copper to keep certain antioxidant defenses up and running. It's like trying to battle a kitchen fire with an empty fire extinguisher.
This is also where too much copper gets interesting. Having high levels can disrupt mitochondria in a completely different but equally disastrous way. According to another study, if your brain cells get bathed in excess copper, it can lead to everything from an increase in reactive oxygen species to that dreaded phenomenon, protein clumping.
And those protein clumps include amyloid beta and alpha-synuclein, which are nasty players in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, respectively. So ironically, copper can play both hero and villain. You need it for proper functioning, but at toxic levels, it invites the proteins to have a chaotic party in your neurons. Nobody wants that.
Mitochondrial dynamics get disrupted in the process. Excess copper can drive the mitochondria into more fission, like the organelles keep splitting off, and less fusion, where they merge together. A bit of fission and fusion is normal, but skewing that balance leads to dysfunctional, fragmented mitochondria that can't produce the energy your brain cells require.
They basically throw tiny tantrums and churn out even more reactive oxygen species. It's a vicious cycle. More damage, less effective energy production, more damage, and so on. The cell eventually waves the white flag and triggers processes like mitophagy, trying to remove these broken mitochondria. But with copper overload, that cleanup system gets completely overwhelmed, leading to an accumulation of useless mitochondrial scraps.
Meanwhile, there's something called coproptosis, a type of cell death that's apparently triggered by high copper levels. Now, I like to think if the cell's drama had an official name, it'd be something that ends with -ptosis. And sure enough, here we have it, coproptosis.
Coproptosis might sound like an indie band name, but it's essentially a meltdown of the neuron triggered by excess copper. The cell says, "I can't handle this metal anymore. Good night, sweet prince." And that contributes to neurodegeneration, raising the stakes even higher. So clearly, the sweet spot for copper is what we're all aiming for, neither too low nor too high.
Now let's bring iron into the conversation. Many people think they're iron deficient, but there's a viewpoint that true iron deficiency is much rarer than doctors often claim. It's usually only found after significant blood loss, not in everyday scenarios like monthly cycles or slight dietary lapses. Actually, the problem might lie in copper deficiency because that wrecks iron recycling.
Morley Robbins has talked about this extensively. Without enough copper, your body can't properly recycle iron from old red blood cells, so you end up with iron building up in the wrong places, while the labs might still show you as low in iron because it's not floating freely in the bloodstream. Instead, it's hanging out in your tissues, loitering like that weird neighbor who never seems to leave their front porch.
The result is a shortage of iron in the right places and an overload in the wrong ones. That leads to metabolic issues, plus it aggravates your mitochondria because iron can generate free radicals if it's not managed well. Meanwhile, your body is screaming for copper, but you're topping up on iron supplements. That's about as helpful as tossing more kindling into a raging bonfire.
Right? And copper deficiency also affects your body's ability to handle glucose and protect against oxidative stress. Genes related to glucose metabolism and antioxidant activity can be downregulated without enough copper. It's like your internal housekeeping staff is on strike. Sugar piles up unhandled, oxidative stress piles up unquenched, and the place becomes a mess.
So, once again, we see how copper is pivotal for overall metabolic health, especially in the brain. Because if your cells can't burn glucose efficiently, your brain misses out on vital energy. And if antioxidants aren't doing their job, your brain feels the hit from the free radicals. Double whammy?
Let's dive deeper into the mitochondria, because that's where a lot of the drama plays out. Your mitochondria host these 5 complexes, cytochromes, that shuffle electrons to create the energy molecule ATP. Without copper, these complexes lose their mojo. Suddenly, they're playing the electron transfer game with half the team absent.
And each mitochondria needs tens of thousands of copper atoms, like 50,000 or so, to function optimally, which means if you're severely deficient, your energy production nosedives. And it's not just your jogging stamina that suffers. Your neurons can't fire properly. Your synapses can't communicate well. Your entire mental clarity might slip.
If we shift from deficiency to overload, your mitochondria still get hammered, because now you have too many free radicals. Either way, it's dysfunction city. That's why it's crucial to test for copper imbalance, especially in the context of brain health. And if your copper is low, you can look into dietary sources, like grass-fed beef liver, certain shellfish, and even some forms of whole food vitamin C that help you absorb copper better.
Grass-fed beef liver is apparently a copper superstar. But be honest, Alara, have you ever just thought, you know what I'm craving tonight, a nice plate of liver? Or do you have to talk yourself into it each time?
Let's say I have occasionally had to employ every marinade trick in the book, but it's worth it. Oysters, if sourced responsibly, are also a potent copper source. And for those who just can't do organ meats, there are copper supplements out there, like copper bisglycinate. They're usually well absorbed, especially if you pair them with the right nutrients and enough healthy fats.
That's a big one. Copper is considered a fat-soluble mineral, so if you're eating a super low-fat diet, you might be sabotaging your copper absorption. But let's not forget that some folks have too much copper. If that's the case, then backing off copper-rich foods might be wise.
Exactly. So the moral of the story is, test your levels. See if you're in that sweet spot. Because if you have an overload, you don't want to keep pumping your system with even more. On the flip side, if you're under the ideal range, you want to correct that so that your mitochondria and iron metabolism can get back on track.
Now, there's also the dynamic of how copper interacts with methylation. If you're undermethylated, your body can have more trouble clearing out excess copper. Sometimes you need supportive nutrients to improve methylation pathways so that your system can properly manage minerals. Another reason it's so important to look at each body as a whole system, not a bunch of disconnected parts.
Absolutely. If you think about it, copper and iron are the tango partners of the mineral world. One can't do its job without the other being in sync. Copper helps load iron onto transferrin, the iron-transporting protein. If there's no copper, iron remains trapped in storage cells, like a pile of unused library books that never make it back to the shelves.
Meanwhile, you're feeling sluggish, and your labs might read as low iron, so you start taking iron supplements. That's like adding more books to the storeroom when the library is closed. Not the best idea. You'll just wind up with too much iron rusting away inside your tissues.
Well said, Mr. Observational Humor. Let's zoom out and give people some practical strategies. First off, a balanced diet that suits your microbiome is crucial. That includes enough protein, around 0.8 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass, and high-quality, real foods. If you need more copper, grass-fed beef liver and shellfish can help, or a targeted supplement.
And if you have too much copper, you'll want to scale back on those foods. Also, paying attention to your magnesium levels is wise, because magnesium helps your cells produce energy and maintain balance. That synergy is key. Mineral interactions matter.
Precisely. Another helpful trick for high copper levels is supporting your body's ability to bind the excess copper. Some people take chelating agents or supportive nutrients, but the main takeaway is that you can't just focus on copper alone. You need to ensure your entire mineral matrix is balanced and that your mitochondria have everything they need, from copper to magnesium, from iron to vitamin C.
Right? Then there's the aspect of lifestyle. Sun exposure helps with cellular energy, but it's important to not overdo it if your diet has been loaded with problematic vegetable oils that contain too much linoleic acid, because those can oxidize in your skin when exposed to intense sunlight. Once you reduce those oils for a while, your tolerance for safe sun time goes up.
Indeed. And there's an interesting practice called grounding, connecting with the Earth's electrons, that some individuals use to mitigate stress in the body. If you're near the ocean, you can walk barefoot on the sand or dip your feet in the water, which some folks report helps rebalance the body's electrical state. It's definitely an intriguing area of exploration.
So, we have an intricate balancing act: copper for energy, for healthy neurotransmitters, for proper iron recycling. But if the pendulum swings too far into copper overload, we risk meltdown in the mitochondria, oxidative damage, and neurological mischief. Neither scenario sounds like a day at the spa.
Well, unless your spa day includes hot rocks made of the perfect copper-iron ratio, accompanied by complementary bulletproof mitochondria. But I haven't seen that spa special on Groupon yet. If it ever appears, sign me up.
Will do. Let's circle back to how crucial it is for brain health. We see that low copper is associated with Parkinson's disease dementia, high copper can lead to disruptions seen in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and both extremes can cause mitochondria to either starve or choke. Moral of the story: aim for balance and keep a close eye on how minerals work together.
Yes. For those listening who wonder if copper deficiency or overload might be lurking in the background, it's worth exploring, especially if you've been wrestling with unexplained fatigue or neurological symptoms. As always, an overall healthy lifestyle sets the foundation. Sometimes the details, like checking mineral levels, are the missing puzzle piece.
Indeed. So the next time you see a shiny copper penny on the street, maybe you'll view it with a bit more reverence. Or at least, you'll think about how that same element is making a cameo in your brain cells.
I would suggest not swallowing the penny, though. We're not recommending that method of copper intake. But the metaphorical significance is top-notch.
Absolutely. Now, we've covered copper's involvement in both iron homeostasis and mitochondrial function, two critical aspects of how your cells stay energized and free of oxidative chaos. Balanced copper also helps avoid that dreaded meltdown in your neurons, where proteins clump, mitochondria fragment, and your system waves the white flag.
It's like the molecular soap opera that never ends, but at least we have the script in front of us. Thank you, copper, for the dramatic flair. Let's also consider that the brain is especially sensitive to these mineral imbalances because neurons need so much energy. If the mitochondria malfunction, guess which organ is first to notice?
The one in your skull, yes. That's why so many neurodegenerative conditions circle back to basic cellular housekeeping, ensuring minerals are balanced, mitochondria are healthy, and oxidative stress is handled. Copper stands out as a star in that show.
Definitely. And because we've been focusing on copper, we shouldn't forget the other big players. Magnesium, zinc, selenium, these two have cameo roles. But copper has this unique capacity to both help and hinder, which is what makes it so fascinating.
In the end, it's about synergy. One day we'll figure out how to measure synergy in a neat blood test. Until then, we rely on stepping back, looking at patterns, and ensuring no single mineral is running amok in our system.
Well said. And for those who need a quick takeaway, if you're short on copper, you disrupt iron recycling, hamper mitochondrial function, and open the door to issues like cognitive decline and poor antioxidant defenses. If you're swimming in copper, you risk protein clumping, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial breakdown. In both cases, your neurons pay the price.
That sums it up neatly. So if you find yourself feeling fatigued, cognitively foggy, or noticing signs that your minerals might be off, it could be worth investigating copper. A small tweak can sometimes deliver outsized benefits for energy, mood, and long-term brain health.
And that's Dr. Mercola's cellular wisdom segment on copper in a nutshell. Let's be grateful that nature has given us a wide array of solutions, like nutrient-dense foods and balanced lifestyles, to keep things in check. Now we just have to actually implement them.
Implementation is always the trick, isn't it? We're quite good at reading about a healthy dish, but cooking it is another story. Yet for the sake of that sweet, sweet ATP, maybe a few more plates of copper-rich food are worth it.
I'll raise a fork to that. If it helps my mitochondria, I'll even brave a batch of grass-fed liver, but I'm definitely going to sauce it up. This comedic, scientific mind only goes so far.
We can always compromise and start with a mild pâté. Baby steps.
Baby steps indeed. All right, listeners, we hope you enjoyed this journey through copper's double life. The neurological hero we need and the overzealous troublemaker we never asked for. It's a balancing act, folks.
Tune in next time for more deep dives into the fascinating world of cellular health. Until then, may your copper levels remain serenely in the Goldilocks zone. Just right.
And may your mitochondria hum like a well-tuned engine. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Stay curious, stay healthy, and we'll see you on the next episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom.